It seems that the impact of the Trump administration's stance on climate policy in the short term is mostly symbolic, and in the medium and long term, uncertain at this point. There are a number of issues that are up in the air. Potentially the impacts are large, but just to outline some of the things that we're watching and that we're interested in and following closely. Domestically, of course, the key question is to what extent the Trump administration will be able to dismantle some of the environmental legacy that the previous president left. A key policy piece is the Clean Power Plan, which sets emissions performance standards for the power sector and existing fleet. The Trump administration has announced that it is going to repeal those measures, and the question is whether something will come in place, and if so, what that is, and how that would impact the power sector. Internationally, of course, the most dramatic step to date was the announcement to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, which, again, in the short term, doesn't have a big impact. It's going to take a couple of years probably before that happens. It might even be that it is not effectuated before Trump's first term ends, or the current term, I should obviously say. But there are too a number of key questions to watch. What are how are other countries responding? So far, we've seen an outcry in other levels of governance in other geographies, both within the United States and internationally, of organizations and countries and country representatives that say we want to do more. And obviously, time will have to tell whether that's enough to fill the void that is now that seems to be emerging. A more imminent concern, or the several more imminent concerns. One is how a void that is going to emerge with regard to financing and putting financial measures in the Green Climate Fund, how that will be filled. The U.S. signaled that it's unlikely to meet the full amount that the Obama administration had announced that it would contribute. And so others have signaled that they might want to, step in and do more, but that remains to be seen at this point. And the second important piece is mission innovation. Was a group spearheaded by the former Secretary of Energy from the United States, Mr. Moniz. A group of coalition of the willing, of the most ambitious, if you will, where innovation and technological investment was going to be clustered and spurred, and that group now needs a new chair because the United States' new energy secretary is not likely going to fill that role. So those are all questions that we're looking at. So a lot of uncertainty in the short term, as I said. I think mostly symbolic impact, but with a lot of damage, obviously, for the U.S. diplomatic stature. And then medium and long term, potentially very significant impacts, but it's too early to tell. Well, we've heard a lot of rhetorics, obviously, throughout the election campaign and then also afterwards about how the president is intending to revive the coal industry. At this point, we do not have a lot of indication that will happen. Although it depends a little on how you frame it. So some of my colleagues did some in-depth research looking at what the key drivers were that led or that contributed to the demise of coal. And first thing to observe is that this is not a short-term thing. Coal's been in decline for a number of decades for a variety of reasons, in particular increased automation and efficiency in the coal mining sector, and then pressure on the fuel source by competitive forces that were led in particular by natural gas, which is cheap and abundant. Second, which is a general trend, I think, in OECD countries, a decline in electricity consumption. And then the fall in cost of renewables, so solar, PV, and wind in particular. So all of these factors contributed to some extent to the decline of coal, and policy was not one of the key drivers. And so taking away policy is also therefore not likely to revive the coal industry, if you will. Now, having said that, as I mentioned earlier, the Trump administration did announce that it wants to repeal the Clean Power Plan, which was sort of the flagship program of the Obama environmental legacy, setting emissions performance standards, and that program was designed to accelerate, if you will, existing trends that I just described in the U.S. power sector. And so it was, if put into action, it was going to spur and accelerate that trend that I described, in which we would see more phase out of coal-fired electricity from the U.S. fuel mix in the coming decades. Now, if you take that piece of legislation away, and let's assume for a second that one does, even though there's going to be a lot of legal battle and quite likely it has to be replaced with something else. But if we assume we take it away, then modeling work does suggest that buys a lot of time for the coal industry. So what effectively you do is, without having those emissions performance standards, a coal-fired power plant that might otherwise have been phased out next year would then maybe have another decade or so to operate. And so even though I think that if you, depending on your definition of reviving the industry, you would buy time for the industry, but the impacts of that obviously are not significant. Whether that plant runs another 10 years or not has a meaningful impact on greenhouse gas emissions, on your fuel mix. But a real revival of the industry and sort of a comeback of coal, we think that's very unlikely at this point.